There's been a lot of criticism from the public and folks directly affected by this plan, some claiming that they were not asked for their input. Is that a fair assumption?
I think the situation we're in will cause people a tremendous frustration. I think any time that you're looking at the possibility of dismissals or layoffs or reduction in salaries, and particularly in this environment, people get angry. And I completely understand that. We have shared the information since the state of the territory, and even before, we've consistently said that this year was going to be a very difficult year. As I said, I've met with the unions 4 times. We've constantly shared with the legislature what's taking place. I've appeared before both chambers of commerce, let them know what's taking place. I've gone before the Hotel Association. So we've shared information. I don't think that people were putting it all together to a certain extent, and we'll continue to communicate, continue to go out there. We have the benefit of only having one level of government, which means that any decision we make goes straight to the consumer, goes straight down to our taxpayer. Mm-hmm. We don't have the luxury of going through 3 levels of government, so there's a direct connection. And as long as we continue to communicate, I think people will understand. But at the end of the day, it is very difficult times. And even though it's difficult, we continue to do some of the more important things in our community. We still have the baseball tournaments to keep our young folks engaged in what's taking place. We had the summer reading program. We opened up the library this weekend for our children. So even as we're dealing with these tremendous financial situations, we at the same time recognize that our community has to continue to prosper, has to continue to function, and we're trying to juggle both at the same time.
Mm-hmm. So why not make the hard cut decisions and hold people accountable for their jobs and do the layoffs? Why didn't we go that route? I understand, the sides and whatnot, sure. But do you think the Senate was afraid to make those hardball decisions?
I don't know. I think the Senate had a different take on it than I did. I clearly have the authority as governor to still do the dismissals if I deem it necessary. But what I don't think would have been beneficial to our community is if the Senate did the 8% and I still did the reductions. I think that would have been a double hit on the community, particularly in a small community where we have so many connections. So I agreed with the Senate to at least take and see what we can achieve during this 3-month period of time, see what we could get through incentivizing. Even with that, however, even if we achieve that, and we achieve the numbers we're looking for, we still have about a $40 million deficit going into fiscal year 2012, which the budgetary process they're going through now hopefully will address it. There was a 0.5% increase in the gross receipts. They're completely against an additional increase in the gross receipts, which I completely understand. I recognize the impact on business and the flow through to the consumer. They previously had opposed the unpaid holidays. Not that we took the holidays away, but that employees would not get paid for it. So in the absence of accepting those proposals, I presume the Senate will come up with alternatives that they feel that the community is willing to accept, and they're willing to accept. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, my requirement is I have to have a balanced budget. I have to match resources with the ability to not just meet payroll, but meet the most basic of needs, whether that's opening of school to residents that we have off island that we have to care for police services, to the picking up of waste in our community. So I have to, that's my responsibility. And so I'm going to work with them to see, can we achieve that? If we can't, then there's some other tough decisions that I will make and I'll have to make by October 1.
Has the administration begun to formulate plans for the next fiscal year with the looming shortfall?
Definitely. I mean, we're looking at what happens if we don't achieve the salary cuts, the reductions that are necessary. What happens if our revenue projections aren't at the level to be able to sustain us? So we're looking at the various scenarios that are necessary beyond October 1 into fiscal year 12. That's the only way that I think we'll be able to manage the resources that are necessary. Most important is that we can't borrow. I think borrowing is no longer an option. There's a complete disagreement of going that way, and there's a reluctance overall to do that. I think we've maxed out on that capability. Revenue increases by taxes or fees are one option to look at, but at the same time, I understand the argument that suppresses your economy in terms of the attraction and also the cost to the local consumer and taxpayer. So we're looking at what options are available to us long term, and we continue still to reduce government. We have more folks leaving government, separations from government, than we have in terms of employment taking place. We're only looking at employment if it's federally funded or special funds that's a revenue generator. Overall, we're working with attrition to reduce the size of government, while at the same time recognizing police officers, healthcare workers, is a class within the employment that we're taking a particular look at to make sure that we don't jeopardize healthcare services or law enforcement across the territory. So this is very much a difficult time for our community. It's one where I think that individuals need to look at a greater community than the self-interest, quite frankly. It's going to require the business community to step up and be a lot more aggressive, possibly in fees and in taxes and investment. It's one where employees such as myself and across the board, we're taking the 8% cut. We're eliminating travel out of the general fund. We're making adjustments that are necessary. And I'm continuing to hold departments accountable in terms of reducing costs. So with that all in place, I think the foundation is set. There's a number of projects that we're looking at. There are a number of private sector activities that are taking place that going into the latter half of 2012, hopefully we'll begin to see some growth. Because even with the 8%, it reverts back to the full salary in June of 2012, and at the same time, the gross receipts increase goes back down from 4.5% back down to 4%. So we have increased expenses taking place in June of 2012, and we have reduced revenues, at least with respect to the percentage on the gross receipts. So that's going to cause us to really balance very carefully going forward the next year and a half.
All right. Now, suppose the outcome of the court case isn't ruled in favor of the government of the Virgin Islands, where the 8% cuts don't, cease to exist. What will be the next step?
Then the next step will be for me to look at whether it's appealable. Do I think we should appeal, or to just make the decision right then and there that will go towards the dismissals as an option? The budgetary impact is tremendous. Making sure that we're able to maintain resources so we continue to pay our obligations. And again, those obligations are, in addition to salaries, are just basic obligations in our communities that we have to meet. And at that point, I'll make the decision to continue with the dismissals or look at maybe appealing. At that point in time, then a decision will be made. And I'm hoping that the union membership will at least talk to the leadership and say, it is better for us to have a universal sacrifice than the decision be made that we need to send home 600 to 700 employees. And that's important because if we're not able to identify resources to fill the gap going into fiscal year 12, then that 600 number could clearly double. So that's an even drastic, a much more far-reaching impact within our community. And that's why I think that the 8% as a compromise at least achieves a certain amount of stability. It doesn't achieve everything that's needed, but at least it spreads it across the board. If we don't have the 8% and we go towards the dismissals and we're not able to come up with the creativity for fiscal year 12, then that 600 is just the first step of what could be even additional dismissals.
Has your office reached out to